Hi everybody, this is Jason Parker again from Copperworks Distilling. I'm the president and co-founder of Copperworks, and thank you for joining us. We're going to do a kind of a conversation at the very end of everything we've been talking about so far. We've been talking about how we make our products. We did a tour of the distillery. We've talked about how we make select the malt, how the farms are grown. We also talked about how we did fermentation and brewing, how we've done distillation. We talked about barrels last week or 2 weeks ago, I think it was. What we're going to talk about now is actually the final product of making a whiskey, which is selecting barrels and blending them. So here's some of the things I'll go over today. We'll talk about how we select which casks we use in a release. We'll talk about our approach to selecting those casks, the methodologies we use, how it's different from the big national brands and why. We'll talk about, learn a little bit more about the releases that are on the label. Right now on a label you can only read just a little bit of information, but we'll tell you where you can get a whole lot of information. And then we'll talk about why we proof to different proofs and what our sort of standard proof is becoming and why. So that's a lot to talk about. I want to get into this right away. Let's start though first with a drink. That's release 33. That's the one that has the most sherry flavor of anything we've ever done. This is delicious. So let's talk about casks. That was a good intro to casks. Casks are different for a whole bunch of reasons. So think about this. If I were to take a whiskey that comes out of the still, one distillation, and I put it into 10 different barrels. In this case, the most I'd be able to do from one distillation is 2 different barrels. So let's say that I'm doing a collection of 3 distillations. That's going to get me about 8.5 casks. And I'll take that whiskey, I'll mix it all up, and I'll put it in 10 barrels that I've purchased from a cooperage, independent stave, Kelvin Cooperage. Who else do we get?
Canton.
Canton, thank you, Ethan. The challenge is that even if the barrel was specified to be exactly the same, it may be different. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. First of all, imagine that this is a tree. So the parts of the staves, these are staves. So the wood in the barrel could actually be coming from a different part of the tree, could have had different growth cycles, could have come from a different forest entirely. That's one challenge. The other challenge is that the individual construction of each of these staves, how the barrel is put together, where it may leak in some of these, where air may go in, how tight the barrel is. All of that will lead to a difference. What type of bung does it have, and how much evaporation might happen through there? You may remember from one of our previous discussions the important role of oxygen in a barrel in maturing whiskey. Unlike wine and beer, you want oxygen to be in limited amounts to create esters. And then finally, what is the entry proof of the whiskey in there? Oh, I missed toasting and char levels. So we've talked about all the facts that the barrel could be different. Let's just imagine for a moment that the barrel is specified as being exactly the same. You give it a certain amount of years and you pull a sample from each one of those barrels. And with an educated taste panel, you nose and taste those and write down descriptors. What you're going to discover is that you actually have 10 different whiskeys. They're going to be similar, but different. And that's nothing other than pure white magic. That's the art, or the craft, but not the science of putting a whiskey together. You have to use your nose, your palate, and your thoughts about what people are going to enjoy to put a whiskey together. So how do the big guys do it? The big guys do it by taking hundreds and usually thousands of barrels and mingling them together. They've already made the same recipe, they've used the same yeast strain, they have the same process, the same hours in fermentation, the same amount of beer stripping time, the same cuts. Everything is put at the same so that it has less inconsistency, and their goal is to release a consistent whiskey. The reason that people would release a consistent whiskey is really 3 big reasons. One is it certainly simplifies the marketing and the communication around that whiskey. If you're in international trade, you're around the world, you're in every state in the US, people are going to have a little easier time understanding the fact that your whiskey is going to taste the same year after year, place after place. But that comes at a cost. To make that whiskey standard means that you also have to not release some of the best whiskeys. Instead, you have to use them in part of that blend. Another reason that you might want to standardize is really economies of scale. If you are buying a lot of one thing and creating that exactly the same, you can get a much better price. And in fact, really big brands are always on very thin margins. It's very important for them to keep that price as low as possible on the counter. We can't compete. There's no way we can compete in price. So we already don't have the opportunity for economies of scale. We really, at Copperworks, simply don't have the opportunity for volumes. To make a consistent product would mean we'd have to take everything we make, put it into one big batch, and release this for several years. That would be one way to approach the problem, but we would lose all the opportunities. Here's something we get to do that the big guys can't afford to do. And that is, we don't strive for consistency. We strive for excellence. Now I know you're thinking, oh, well, yeah, the big guys strive for excellence too. They do in terms of consistency being the metric of excellence, right? It has to be acceptable. So whatever their product is going to be has to be acceptable in the market. It has to be priced right. It has to have the right branding and story behind it. Ultimately, it has to be tasty enough for the price point to be purchased and repurchased. But it doesn't have to be the best whiskey they have in their warehouse. As a matter of fact, it almost never is the best whiskey they have in their warehouse, because if they put the best whiskey in that bottle, they would not be able to put their worst whiskey anywhere. They need their best whiskey to blend with their worst whiskey. And they can, by doing thousands of barrels, can make a consistent whiskey. It's obvious that that's the way to go if you're going to be an international brand selling millions and millions of cases. It's also obvious there's no reason for us to pursue that. So we don't. What we do instead is we only pick the barrels that we think are delicious. How do we do that? Through taste panel. So it turns out that a taste panel is a process. Let's see, I want to make sure that I am covering everything in here. Yes, quality over efficiency. Taste panel is a group of all folks here working in production. So myself, Jeff, Barrett, Ethan, Thomas, all sit down and do taste panel. And we've had other brewers and other people in the tasting room. They've been joining us too. Normally in big brands, you only have one master noser. They make all of the decisions because, in fact, that one person is going to be more consistent. Remember, the goal for the big guys is consistency. They're going to be more consistent because their brain is keeping all of that data the way their brain stores memories of flavors. It's not the way we're trying to do it. We think that by having more of us, we're going to have a better chance of representing different palates out there in the marketplace. So just because I like something doesn't mean that everybody in the world's going to like it that might come across our bottle. But if I like it, and Ethan likes it, and Barrett likes it, and Thomas likes it, that's a better chance that more people will like it. So we all participate in Taste Panel. It's not just a way to train everybody. It's in fact a way to make sure we're releasing a whiskey that has the most correct appeal. So here's what we do. We take barrel samples. Ethan, let's look at these little bottles over here. We literally pull samples from bottles. You'll see that these bottles are getting close to empty. We've numbered them A, B, C, and in this case we knew which one of these were, and over here we've also numbered them A, B, and C. Later we'll come by and write what the barrel number is, but at first we're tasting them with just the date and the name on there. They are blind samples. By the way, they would have been filled at the time when we were starting this taste panel. We used to sit here in the tasting room over tables and we'd all drink them and discuss them in place. Now we'll have a person in each room because of COVID. We'll be sure that we're separated while we're tasting. And we'll be tasting little samples like this at cask strength. This is about how much we'll have in there. And we'll start with cask strength. The first thing we do is nose it. We write down descriptors of all of them, nosing them before we taste any of them. We'll then taste through them, write down descriptors of those. I'll tell you more about the descriptors in a moment. And then we'll write down the descriptors of the finish. Then we'll go through and add a little bit of water. We'll take a dropper, deionized water, lower the proof. The goal is no longer to taste it at cask strength, but to actually bring it down considerably closer to what we might bottle it at. So 100 proof instead of 125 or 130. We'll give that the same process, a nose, a taste, a finish. We'll score them. I wanted to show you a little bit about how we score. We actually have these evaluations, these scales, so that we have 9 numbers that we can rank, and we're ranking 3 things. We're ranking nose, taste, and finish, and then an overall score to the whiskey. So we actually end up giving it 4 scores. The worst thing is that we really don't like this whiskey. That might be because we only barreled it a week ago. It might be because somebody really doesn't like a particular flavor in there. Matter of fact, I don't think we've ever seen a 1, but we have seen a 2. We moved closer to, I really am not pleased with it, to I'm not too displeased with it. And then the neutral, the 5, is pretty much where this is getting somewhere, but it's not ready yet. Once we're in the 6, 7s, 8s, and 9s, you can tell that we're really deciding that we like this whiskey. These are the ones that we're getting closer to bottling. But just because one person gives it a low score doesn't mean that if everybody else gives it a high score, we won't use it. That also is an interesting indicator that, of course, not everybody is going to like everything that we make. So some people are going to have flavors that they enjoy, other people are going to have flavors they don't. We're not afraid to release a divisive whiskey as long as we think it's a fantastic whiskey for most of our customers. But there will be some people who really are not as big of a fans of it, and that's okay. We're going to be releasing something for them too. We also, here's a quick descriptor. We have a few primary descriptors. Now, Copperworks has made its own tasting vocabulary. This is about 15 words. Our vocabulary has about 170 words. And then we also make up words as we go along. So after we've done the nosing, the tasting, and the final score, we'll discuss them. And this is where we actually all talk about the flavors. When we're doing these per barrel, remember that this is per every cask, we're also going to end up coming up with sort of a feeling for what to do with this cask. And at the end of the conversation, we have one more thing I want to share with you. We sort of have this topic here that says this sample is ready as is or into blend. So in other words, it could be a single cask or it could be included in a blend. It's not something that we would want to release as a single cask, but it's definitely an interesting component in a blend, and I want to tell you about the word blend in a minute, or it's just simply not ready. So just because something gets a high score doesn't necessarily mean it's ready, and just because something gets a lower score doesn't necessarily mean it's not ready, and here's why. When we're trying to build a whiskey out of 4, 5, 6, 7 different casks, we're trying to make the most excellent taste we can from the products we have that are in a maturity zone. And by that I mean they're definitely no longer tasting like young whiskeys, but they aren't just barrel bombs. They actually have a lot to offer in different aspects. By putting them together, we may discover that we miss some of the details that we enjoyed on the single tasting. So we may want to include some whiskeys that have a slightly lower rating because some of those flavors are really delicious. The other flavors that had are really delicious. And when blended, makes a better whiskey than it is by itself. In fact, I think it's almost truism for every one of our releases that the sum of whiskey is the sum is greater than the parts. All of these casks we have enjoyed, but when we put them together, we end up with something that's more interesting. I like to describe it like this. If you have a whiskey that has a flavor like this, and the gamut from sweet to sour, and another whiskey that's got floral to fruity, and another whiskey that's dry and earthy and oaky. And you put them together, you get, the middle is all whiskey. That's the Copperworks experience, the expression. But all of these interesting points here are not as strong. They're not just one-dimensional. Now they're multi-dimensional. And that gives you a more balanced and interesting whiskey. You can explore it from different angles. That's our goal. So what, in summary, what we are doing by these very tiny releases is we're requiring that we tell you a lot of information on the label about what it is and why we did it that way. That means that on the label, we are able to tell you just the bare amount of information. Let me show you release 31 just so you can see the difference in what some of those numbers are. Release 31 tells you about all the different recipes and barrels. Release 33 is just that single barrel, still different recipes. So online is a PDF for each of these releases. If you go to Copperworks Distilling, you look under whiskey, under our products, and then under whiskey, and you look at the current and past whiskeys, you'll see a link that goes to a spreadsheet. Each of those spreadsheets is going to be between 2 and 5 pages deep. It's not a spreadsheet, I'm sorry, it's a PDF document, and it will tell you every brew, every distillation, every fermentation, every distillation, every barrel that we use, where it came from, what the toast and char was, what the proof was, etc. What our yield is, what we blended, how much we ended up with, and then how many bottles we got from it. The last thing that we have to pick when we're doing a whiskey is the proof. So let's say we've now picked 6 barrels and we're going to mingle them all together. We run them through a pump to mix them all up. We let them sit for a couple of days to really get blended. We pump, circulate again, and we get to this point where we now have cask strength of all those different casks, bulk of whiskey that has all the flavors together. We then go through the same process of tasting that whiskey. We taste it, we used to actually taste it at 80 proof, 85 proof, 90, 95, 100, 105, 110, 115, 120, and then cask strength, which is usually 125, 126 proof. The problem with that is that's too many whiskeys to taste and still be able to make informed decisions. We learned that we never really like a whiskey below about 94 proof, and that we generally don't like whiskeys over about 115 proof. So that gave us the opportunity to really narrow in and only taste 3 or 4 proofs. Once we get those 3 or 4 proofs, then we can even narrow them more finely. So if we like between 100 and 105, then we can taste 100, 101, 2, 3, 4, and 5 and pick the ones we like. What we've discovered over the years is that 100 proof seems to be a really good number for Copperworks. It's just because of our barrel entry proof, because of our angel share and the proof that rises in the barrel, that around 100 proof is beginning to become a more standard number for us. Now, if you think about the lowest proof, that's 80 proof that you're legally allowed to put into a bottle. You can't go below 80 and still call it a vodka, gin, or a whiskey. So those are always at 80 proof or above. Most distilleries will either bottle at the lowest proof, that means that they're giving you a lot more water than whiskey, and that is profit, or they'll go a little bit higher in order to avoid any chill haze in the product when it's sitting on the shelf, maybe up to 94 proof, as high as that. Again, we're not really worried about the economies of it. Maybe we should be, but we're worried a lot more about how delicious it is, and 100 proof, between 100 and 104 seems to be a really good number for us. If we go too high in proof, it actually is maybe delicious, but burns. So we have to be careful not to have too much alcohol in there. Proofing is nothing more than adding deionized water, but you do have to add it in a very specific way, slowly, in such a way that you don't end up causing a haze to form in the whiskey. At high proofs like we have, we've never had a hazing problem, but that is something that people who are bringing their whiskey all the way down to 80 have to be super careful about. Fortunately, we can avoid that problem by never bottling anything that low. Finally, we have the idea of a single cask. So we talked about how we went through all of these whiskeys, and one of the things we can mark is it's ready as is or in a blend. When we say it's ready as is, we simply mean this one is so delicious that yes, it could contribute some interesting part as a blend, but it might actually be better just to sell this one just like it is. Then we have the decision, are we going to sell it at cask strength, or is it better if we add a little bit of water? Sometimes what we'll do is do it at cask strength, and then you can add the water. Other times we think, well, at cask strength, it's just simply too hot. Everybody is going to have to add water, and we'd like to make it so that you can enjoy it at the top end of its flavor, not beyond that for a burn. We've done, I think, maybe one release, maybe two, which were single casks that were not at cask strength, but it is an opportunity for us to sometimes release below cask strength, a single cask. So that's our that's kind of our tasting scale. I want to see if there's anything else I wanted to cover in here. Oh yes, what we'll end up with soon is the ability for you, if you're watching Jeff's reviews of the new releases, you'll see that sometimes we're actually going to invite you to taste along with us and fill out this form online. We can use your feedback to actually talk about what the flavors are and maybe inform us on the next batch, maybe inform us in general about anything we're doing. This is a skill that takes, I'm going to say, years to develop. Nobody is born great at putting words to flavors and aromas, but you get good at it as you listen to others, as you begin to learn how to taste and smell. So it's a skill that we've been developing. I like to say that by the time we're done doing this, we'll be qualified to do this. That's true. This takes a long time to learn, and it's literally a lifetime's worth of experimentation. But I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you continue to taste the different whiskeys. Now you know a little bit about the process of how we make them, and then finally how we blend them and proof them. Thanks a lot. Sláinte.